and welcome to The Full Scottish. My name's Lesley Orr, and I'm very pleased that we have with us this morning Rona Mackay, MSP, who's joining me to talk about this week's stories and events. Rona is the MSP for Strathkelvin and Bearsden, and a former journalist, so she's had plenty of experience about talking about current events. We're hoping also that Frances Coppola will be joining us, and when she does, I'll certainly welcome her as well. We've got a lot of issues to discuss today, but I'm going to begin with the update on the situation in Ukraine. This is day 746 of the full-scale invasion by Russia of Ukraine. Pope Francis has said in an interview that Ukraine should have what he called the courage of the white flag and negotiate an end to the war with Russia. Francis made his comments in an interview recorded last month with Swiss broadcaster RS. Don't be ashamed to negotiate before things get worse, the 87-year-old pontiff said. The Pope's comments have brought outrage and condemnation in Ukraine. Turkish and US officials have held comprehensive talks about the wars in Ukraine and Gaza and various bilateral issues during meetings in Washington. Turkey's foreign minister said late on Friday. Hakan Fidan said he discussed ways to end Russia's invasion of Ukraine with officials, including his US counterpart, Antony Blinken, reiterating that Ankara believed it is time to discuss paths towards an end to the war, but that Turkey did not see this willingness from Kyiv and Moscow. UK Foreign Minister David Cameron said he opposes sending Western troops to Ukraine, even for training missions. This was in an interview with the German daily Süddeutsche Zeitung, which was published on Saturday. Poland's foreign minister says the presence of NATO forces in Ukraine is not unthinkable, and that he appreciates the French president for not ruling that idea. Ukraine authorities said 2 people, including a teenage boy, were killed on Saturday in Russian artillery attacks in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Ukrainian officials said on Saturday a Russian bomb landed near a block of flats in the southern city of Kherson, wounding a child. It published a video of a destroyed building with a large crater outside it. A 7-year-old boy who suffered from the shelling is under medical supervision, said authorities. Russian air defences claim to have downed a Ukrainian MiG-29 fighter jet over Ukraine's Donetsk region. Russian authorities said traffic had been temporarily suspended over the Crimea Bridge on Saturday. This is a move which has often been made because of expected or actual attacks. A Moscow court has sentenced a student at Moscow State University to 10 days in jail after he renamed his Wi-Fi network with Slava Ukraini, a pro-Kiev slogan, according to the RIA Novosti news agency. And Russia said on Saturday that it had destroyed 47 Ukrainian drones over its southern regions overnight, mostly in the Rostov area bordering Ukraine. Rona, I wonder if you have any comments about the situation in Ukraine and where things have reached.
Sure, thank you, Lesley, and well, good afternoon now. Yeah, I mean, like all wars, it's just horrible and depressing to think that this has been, 2 years now, and it's still going on, and no solution can be reached, and it's really very hard to see how it is going to come to a conclusion. I mean, I totally despair of it, and I suppose to some extent the focus has been taken off Ukraine because of the the Gaza-Israel conflict. Um, and no war. There's no hierarchy of wars. That they still kill innocent people, women and children all the time. So yeah, I mean it's just terrible, and I just would love to see a resolution there.
Yeah, it seems to really have settled into a pretty grim war of attrition.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm very glad to welcome Francis also, who's joined us. Francis Coppola, who's an economist, financial journalist and writer, joining us from down south. Very nice to see you, Francis. Uh, Again,
Pleased to be here.
is there anything yeah, anything that that particularly struck you about the situation? I was wondering about the Pope's comments, the Pope's reported
Mm.
comments that he really thinks it's time for Ukraine to be negotiating. What what do you make of that?
Um, I think if the West is not going to stump up the weapons that Ukraine needs to win this war, and indeed possibly the troops as well now, since Ukraine is running out of people, then negotiation is where it's going to have to be. I wish it hadn't come to this. I think the West had acted more forcefully in the first place. Um, it might not have come to this, but I do think it's where we are now. The problem we have is that, certainly from my reading of Putin's intentions, he cannot be seen to win, because if he is, then the rest of Europe can't be regarded as safe. And I think the Baltic states understand this. I think most Eastern European states understand this. I'm not sure that the Western ones do.
Hmm. Yeah, this is clearly an issue that we're going to be coming back to time and again. But for now, let's move on to talk a bit about that other current situation of war and violence and killing, the situation in Gaza. The latest figures this morning are that 31,045 people have now been killed in Gaza, well over 70,000 injured. And all the predictions that starvation and mass famine are an inevitability are beginning to come to reality. We now know that 25 children have died of starvation, and this can only continue. The Israeli air attacks are continuing. In the meantime, Biden has been dropping aid from planes, aid which seems to be not only utterly insufficient for what's required, but also in itself is killing people. And of course he's got this big plan for shipping aid into a floating port in Gaza. But he has stated that no red line has yet been crossed as far as he's concerned, and that would make him stop his support for the actions of the Israeli state. Rona, where have we reached with this, and where can this situation be go? Where can and how might it be resolved?
Well, I mean, 31,000 killed and countless numbers injured, and the majority of them would seem to be women and children. It's just horrendous. It's really beyond comprehension how this can be going on. This is you talk about the famine. This is a man-made famine, and it should not have come to this. Um, and I think well, my party have always been clear from the outset about an immediate ceasefire, and that we should be the Western world should be pushing for that all the time. Um, I'm convener of the cross-party group on men's violence against women and girls, and we wrote to the UK government and to the BMA months ago, asking them to put pressure on and to support an immediate ceasefire. No response has been received, and I just think it's heartbreaking when I know everybody finds it the same. It's really hard to watch on the news and sit by and see this going on. And the thing that is in my mind is always about the trauma that the surviving children will have for the rest of their lives. Those who've lost parents and siblings, entire families, even if they haven't, if they've been so far spared, they will never forget these things that no children should ever see. So the actual uh, violence and trauma of this is going to last several lifetimes, and nothing good can come of this unless Israel stops bombing Gaza and innocent people. Their claims that they don't target human, people, innocent victims, is just not true, and we see that countless times. A car a few days ago, a man with his family in a car was targeted outside a shop. You know, there'd be too many examples of that to even begin to explain. So it just has to stop, and I think Israel must be held to account now for their disproportionate action against Gaza.
Thanks, Rona. I know that the South African government have gone back to the International Court of Justice this week to update their appeal and for ceasefire and to a recognition that this is genocide.
Yeah.
Rona's saying that this must stop. Francis, how will it stop? What will bring about this the situation where this might come to an end and we have some kind of resolution?
Where we are now, I don't see any signs of it stopping, really, because ultimately this boils down to United States politics. We're in an election year. Both sides, I hate to say this, are hugely dependent upon AIPAC funding. Neither side wants to upset Israel. In a way, both sides need to out-support the other. So even some of the things that Biden is doing, like this stuff about an Israeli port, when you dig into that, you find that this was a proposal made by Israel back in 2016, which has suddenly been resurrected as a solution to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But Israel will control everything that goes through that port, just as it does whatever goes through the land crossings. So a solution to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, this is not. It is Biden agreeing to fund something that Israel has wanted for 8 years.
Given the global wave of outrage, I mean, we're still seeing mass demonstrations on the streets of this country and of countries around the world. Is this really always going to be about geopolitics? Is there ever going to be a just solution? Rona and I were talking briefly about whether there could be a meaningful two-state solution. Is that a prospect that the United States and Israel are serious about, and our own government in Westminster?
I think what they mean by a two-state solution is not any kind of state that you or I would recognise, certainly not the kind of independent state that the Palestinians want. Look at support by the Trump administration for a two-state solution, and it was a series of connected Bantustans, with Israel controlling everything, really. It wasn't a sovereign independent state. And although when they ban the words like two-state solution around, I think you'll find nobody, certainly in the United States, really means a sovereign independent state. They mean something with actually less autonomy over its own affairs than Scotland.
I think that's. I couldn't agree more, and I think there would be no equality if we ever get to that point. There would be absolutely no equality there between the states, and I think what we're seeing now is just the horrible culmination of years and years of oppression, in Palestine, and this is it now exploding, and I think it needs sensible heads to negotiate, just to try and take the the macho territorialism out of it, and say, look, we've got to stop all innocent people and women and children being slaughtered, and that's what's happening. And I can't I can't see a glimmer of hope in that at the minute. But I guess all we can do is to continue to hope.
Yeah, interesting that you talk about it being macho posturing, especially in this week of International Women's Day. It does seem to be that so much of global politics and these situations of conflict in Ukraine and in Gaza and elsewhere is driven by that kind of approach, that big man approach to politics. And it is very difficult to see where and how those cool, calm, intelligent heads might.
When does humanity come back into it? When is it time to say enough is enough of this? It never ever wins. It never works, and people die. And it really it's incredible to think that this attitude can go on and on, forevermore. But as I say, we can but hope.
Yeah, indeed, we can only hope. I don't really. I think. Yeah, sorry, Frances.
If I may jump in briefly, I was reading Jeremy Bowen recently, the BBC's Middle Eastern correspondent. He wrote a book called The Making of the Modern Middle East, which predates the present conflict, and which he talks about there being, whenever Israel goes to war, which it does frequently, and I would say has pretty much been at war for the whole of its history, but whenever it goes to war, as opposed to having war inflicted upon it, that it's like two clocks starts, one of which is the length of time the military needs to achieve its objectives, which in this case I would say appear to be the complete clearing of Gaza and the eviction or killing of the resident population. And the second is the diplomatic clock, which runs down faster than the military clock. And all of Israel's diplomatic efforts are always dedicated to making that clock last as long as possible. So the question is really how long the world will tolerate this, and whether the world will tolerate what I think is Israel's objective, which is to, they've put this forward as day after plan now, haven't they? Which is to eliminate most of the resident population and squeeze the rest into two tiny little areas in the south of Gaza and take the rest for themselves.
Yeah, and how long will the world tolerate that if we're already tolerating this mass slaughter of women and children on a genocidal scale? It's hard to see what we are not willing to tolerate, or more particularly what those who have the power to influence the situation might not tolerate. But there was hope that came out of the lowest point in the South African anti-apartheid struggles, and there was a change. So we can only hope that some kind of sense will prevail in the midst of all this horror. But let's move on now and talk about another big event in this week's politics, which was the budget. The Westminster government and Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, announced his budget. It was all pretty much flagged up in advance that there was to be cuts in tax, cuts in national insurance. Doesn't seem to have been much of a bounce for the Chancellor and for the government subsequently. Frances, do you think he was trying to set a trap for the Labour Party, who said that they would actually just follow the same kind of fiscal policy and the same principle of cuts in public spending when they come into power?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. This was actually about making life extremely hard for the Labour government. And the way I read it was that the Tories had pretty much written off the next election, and are now flagging things up for the following election, so the 2028-29 election. They're expecting to lose the next one, but they're setting it up so that Labour is going to have an extremely difficult time with a whole raft of tax rises that are meant to be paid for by harsh and actually impossible spending cuts after the next election. So Labour will be faced with the choice of having to make spending cuts that the people of the country don't want, or putting up taxes again after people have been promised their taxes would be reduced. Either way, come the following election, the Conservatives will go for it as a harsh and a tax rising government, and your government wants to cut cuts public services and takes your money away from it, all that stuff. And we in the Conservative Party will change all this and hope that people have short memories.
And so we go, the swinging backwards and forwards of the age-old pendulum. Rona, from a Scottish perspective, and given the issue, particularly perhaps about the Barnett consequentials and the impact that's going to have on NHS spending, what do you see in this budget? Is there anything to commend it? Anything that we can feel encouraged about?
No, I mean, absolutely nothing. I think, as you said at the start, it was depressingly predictable. I agree 100% with Francis that they are setting up Labour and to fail. And really, in my opinion, Labour are the architects of their own failure by not, saying what changes they would make. Sometimes you can hardly believe you're listening to Labour politicians these days when they don't say that they'll reverse the two-child cap or the rape clause or anything like that. Bankers' bonuses. It's hard to believe the way they're acting. So, but I agree 100% with Francis about the motives. And for Scotland, it was a disastrous budget. Our budget's been cut. Capital budget's been cut by 1.6 billion, which means we can't, go ahead with infrastructure projects. And all of the cuts that we get to our budget, of course, has a knock-on effect. And we see local authorities struggling just now, and there's no question. And when we say that, that's frontline services for everybody, for you and me, and for everybody. So it does have such a disastrous knock-on effect. And but despite all that, I think it's we have to remind ourselves, people living in Scotland, that despite the challenges that we get from getting a reduced budget and the cuts that are going on, we have managed to introduce a child benefit payment, which has been increased to £26.70 a week from April. It's only available in Scotland, and it's estimated to have lifted 100,000 children out of poverty. It's currently helping 323,000 under 16s. So there's that. So there's social security benefit record spending that we're doing in our limited social security powers. And it is about priorities. Obviously, health is something that we have to, health and education are first and foremost. But the result of such a, dare I say, Tory budget is that we are certainly no better off, and it just us harder. It just makes it harder for us to have a fairer Scotland, which is what we want. So yeah, I mean, why would we not have a wealth tax? That would raise around, I think it's estimated 12 billion. Francis will know better than me, but there are things that could have been done to help people through this cost of living crisis, and people really struggling to feed their families and heat their homes, and we're not doing it. So it's about political choices, and unfortunately, we bear the brunt of Tory political decisions.
You say you mean the Republic, Francis? Yeah. What would have been an alternative? What could have been done that would have really supported people in their everyday lives, which is what budgets and chancellors always say they're supposed to be doing.
Well, for me, the most short-sighted thing above all in this budget was the decision to cut public investment again, because it's the development of infrastructure and investment in our public service is what supports growth in this economy. And we have, from an economic point of view, we are we are a stagnation nation. Stagflation at the minute, but when inflation comes down, we will just go back to stagnation. We're not generating the wealth we need to sustain those we want to have. We've got to do that. And cutting public investment is incredibly short-sighted because that's what's going to drive that growth. So I'm actually with, major economic think tanks like the National Institute for Economic and Social Research, who is saying we should be raising public into 3% of GDP. This is a bit of a no-brainer. I'm just astonished that neither party is doing it. The Tories are actually cutting public investment again, and Labour has rowed back on its 28 billion pledge. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Is this something to do, why is there this obsession with debt and with austerity policies, which have been going for such a long time, and as you say, cutting into the bone of investment and generating the kind of wealth and services that we need? What would be?
What would help would be if we stopped rolling investment spending in with current spending. At the moment, we just roll it all together and call it, oh, goodness, we've got all this borrowing, we've got this deficit, we've got this debt. We're not looking at it the way a company would, whereby if you're doing investment spending, you're looking at returns over the longer term, or even like a household would if they're buying a house. They're going to look at their income over the longer term and say, can we afford this house? We're going to invest in it. It's not a sensible way of looking at things to regard all government spending, in effect, as current spending. Roll it all in together and say, oh my goodness, we can't afford this. Yes, we absolutely can, because over the longer term, the returns make it worth our while to invest in infrastructure, in people, in services.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I really do. And I mean, for instance, in Scotland, we desperately need more affordable houses, and we have not ambitious targets. We've got targets that we want to keep, but our housing budget, we just can't. We've had to cut it because it was either that or cut money to the health service, and it's not going to stop us with our goal, but it's going to take a bit longer. And we had been hoping that this budget would have released some more money, that we could have alleviated some of those challenges. But alas, no. But I think, I don't know why we're surprised, really, because that's the Conservative government have their way of working, and it's not really to benefit the majority of us anywhere in the United Kingdom, not just in Scotland. So that's depressing. When they're gone, Labour will do very little different, and they'll be left to try and make their apologies and things like that, and then we'll get a Tory government back, and so it's like ping pong, and it doesn't do the people in this country any good at all.
Okay, so Rona, you of course support independence for Scotland and that would create an opportunity for Scotland to forge its own path economically and politically and so on, an opportunity really to kind of change the dial and all of that. And I know that that in Parliament this week there was a debate about the latest in the series of papers that the SNP has been producing on Scotland as an independent nation. What would that look like? And this latest one is about Scotland's place in the world and how it would see its role and play its part as a member of the global community. What do you think were the kind of key headlines of that paper, and and how did the debate go? You know, what were the
Yeah.
kind of issues that folk
Yeah.
were
Well,
really exercised about?
yeah. I mean, obviously, Brexit was, it is disastrous, not just for Scotland, for the whole of the UK. Scotland did not vote to leave Europe, so that's something that, when we're independent, we would, and we've been reassured that that will be possible for us to rejoin. Defence was a big part of the paper, and the nuclear weapons issue. We want Scotland to be rid. We want everywhere to be rid of nuclear weapons, but we have them here on our shores, about 20 miles from where I live, and Scotland does not want nuclear weapons, and so we would be looking to get out of that when we're independent. Um, we would like to, we would be an independent member of NATO, and that doesn't mean we have to have nuclear weapons. Many independent countries have joined and don't have nuclear weapons. So you asked about the debate in the chamber. Well, the debate in the chamber was pretty shocking, really, certainly from the Tories' point of view. They just kept saying what a waste of time this was. Why are we debating this? Why, you know, and our debates range from things like social security in independent Scotland, about how the poorest in society would fare, and they say it's a waste of time constantly. So that leads me and others to think that they don't really care. They just want to follow the UK's mantra, and have no independent thought even of how we could make life better for the people of Scotland, and how we can stand up for Scotland. So yeah, again, it was fairly predictable. Hardly any Tories in the chamber. Those that were there just shouted at us, saying it was all a waste of time, and they were bored with it. Actually, they kept yawning and saying they were bored with it. Labour pretty much the same. And why are we doing this again? And these papers, building a new Scotland, are really important, because it's putting down in words our view, and our the trajectory that we want, that we are going in, and the kind of Scotland we want to build. And unless you put that to paper, you can talk all you like, but if you need to have stated aims, and that is exactly what we're doing. And I think the people of Scotland deserve that, even if the opposition parties don't want it.
So the paper, I mean, somebody might accuse the SNP of this is just rhetoric, it's just, aspirational stuff.
Yeah.
How much really could we realistically expect to carry through, and really, to what extent is this setting up Scotland as a distinctive nation within the family of nations? In which ways does it really kind of diverge and take a different path from the current
Sure.
UK
Sure.
prospect? I suppose particularly, how feasible would it be for Scotland to clear nuclear weapons off our soil? Is that something that we can really aspire to and imagine
Yes.
happening?
Yes, 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 we absolutely can, and it sounds as if it would be, horrendously difficult. I'm no expert. I've been to many meetings where this was discussed, though, and it would not be as difficult as this, scaremongering would suggest. Scotland would still have our own defence based at Faslane, where the nuclear weapons are, so that would not have to be dismantled. It would just be a question of getting these deadly weapons out of our waters. And I'm not saying it would happen overnight. Obviously, it wouldn't. But we have to start laying the groundwork to do that. In my belief, we have to start doing it, start the planning, because whether opponents like it or not, it will happen. And it's, as I say, it is achievable. And you mentioned aspirational. Well, I think every nation should aspire, and that's exactly what we're doing. There's absolutely no reason why small countries, smaller than ours actually, or some comparable size, are flourishing, and why not Scotland? That's all we're saying. So, and it doesn't mean a horrible divorce and sort of animosity between the rest of the UK. Far from it. We probably would be we'd be great neighbours who would help each other. We just do not want to be ruled by another government. It's as simple as that.
So we'd be great neighbours. Francis, from your standpoint, from your perspective as our neighbour or living in our neighbouring large country, I don't know if you've had a chance to have a look at that paper and some of the proposals that it's making, and certainly talking about membership of NATO, rejoining the EU, modelling Scotland on the kind of Nordic example of a small nation. What's your take on all of that?
I don't think you should underestimate the complication that rejoining the EU would create for the relationship with England. But apart from that, I mean, I don't personally see why Scotland shouldn't be independent. But I think sometimes people, and with the nuclear weapons thing and things like that, it's maybe not going to be as easy as you think. And even to join NATO, and as I said, with the present state of play in England, joining the EU would cause a great deal of complications.
I think we know it's not going to be easy. I mean, these things never are, you know. I think we've known, you know, since 2014 in the referendum, before and beyond that, we know how difficult it will be made for us to achieve our independence. But, you know, we keep getting elected. We're the party of independence. That's what the people of Scotland want. And you know, our party's had some difficulties recently, but support for independence has, you know, gone up. We're now 50-50. At the start of 2014, we were 28% in favour of independence. So we just have to keep believing, you know, that we can do it. But yeah, no, absolutely would not be easy. But what we're doing at this stage is laying the foundations for us to get there. And this year's general election will be a good indication of the support that we have to go on. Because after all, we have a mandate from the people of Scotland. And I suppose it all boils down to whether you think Scotland's a nation or not. And obviously we do, most people do. But those that would like to keep us tied to Westminster would say that, you know, that we're not. So.
Another element of the paper, or something else which is flagged up, and which certainly Scotland has taken active interest in lately, is the notion of a well-being economy. And I'd just like to know, Francis, from your perspective as an economist, does that make sense? Does that really kind of frame the way we look at the economy and fiscal policy in an independent nation, but also working with other nations? You know, what practically difference would a well-being economy look like?
Well, I think it's what everybody should be doing. I mean, the whole purpose of economics is all about people's well-being, about the well-being of the nation, of the well-being of its people. That's what economics is about, really. We don't use that terminology, and perhaps we should, but ultimately that's what it's about. If it's not about that, then what is it?
So it's not just another fashion trend, you know, just call something, you know, well-being. I just want to kind of dig into that a little bit more. What does it actually mean? What does the well-being economy require, or in what ways would that change our economic model and approach and budgeting and so on?
Well, I think the main thing that it changes is this kind of emphasis. It's the neoliberal model, really. The idea that that in a way governments just need to support capitalist endeavours, and somehow everything will be lovely, and otherwise just provide a safety net and stay out of it as much as possible, which is a model that we have adopted over the last 40 years in the UK. and which has, I think, been shown to be wanting in many respects. And perhaps we need to be moving towards a model which pays more attention to the fact that we actually need proper living standards and well-being for all, and we can't just rely on wealth and well-being and prosperity trickling down from the rich to the poor, because the evidence is that it doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry, Lesley.
No, carry on,
Sorry.
Rona.
No, I was thinking there when Frances was talking, it's absolutely true. And last week in Parliament, pro-independence campaigner Lesley Orr screened a film. It's just called Denmark, and that is a society which has well-being at its heart. And it's easy to say, oh, maybe it's just another buzzword or a fad, but when you really think about it, it's about equality. It's about not giving tax cuts to the rich, but it's also about the basics that are actually human rights. A warm, affordable home, able to feed your children and educate them, and we're just not getting that just now. We haven't been getting it, and things are getting worse. So I mentioned earlier about the housing budget, and everything can lead back to the basics. So we can have people in warm homes that they can afford. So many of them will not be getting ill and having to go to hospital. So you save on a health budget, and it's just a knock on a loop. And to me, that makes sense. I'm not an economist, but to me, that makes absolute sense. And these things are basic human rights that are daily being eroded when families can't feed their children.
Yeah, you've already referred, and we've talked a little bit about the gendered impact of war and conflict. The devastating impact and very specific ways in which women and children are impacted by war and conflict. And I think there's something similar here, in our approach to the economy and how we frame it and how we talk about it. As Frances is saying, moving away from that neoliberal model, and certainly something that I've been interested in and a little bit involved in, certainly with no expertise, but the whole notion of feminist or gender budgeting and the way in which you mainstream that. And I know that's something that has been talked about within the Scottish Government.
Yes.
So I wonder if you've got any comments about that, Rona, and also Frances.
Yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely delighted that's the approach that we're taking, because it does go back to just basic humanity, and stop trying to make profits for shareholders and people who can afford to pay their way in things. We have to look after the people of our nation, and there's no, I mean, women have led the way in that all over the world for centuries, and we would continue, we will continue to do that. So it makes sense for that slant to be put on any future budgeting, and it's vital, in fact, that it does, because there's so many things it would affect. So no, I'm absolutely in favour of that.
Frances, is this something that's been part of your work on the economy and sort of thinking about what that would look like, in the ways in which the gendered impacts and mainstreaming need to be taken into account?
I think that we have to move to more of a caring economy. I don't mean that in certain terms of we tend to think of caring as being sort of certain groups. We've got to care for the elderly. For the frail elderly. We've got to, so we talk about adult social care. We've got to care for children, so we talk about childcare. We don't really seem to have this sense that caring is something that everybody does. Much of it still falls on women. But actually, we need to move away from this idea that we have kind of almost like wealth creators, and then we have carers, and the carers are like the second class people who aren't good enough to be wealth creators. They get on with caring, and that seems to be almost like the attitude. We've got to get away from that. Caring is something everybody does, everybody should do, and that when everybody cares, actually we can all create wealth together. And that maybe that's a more radical way of looking at it.
Yeah, that's a good way of kind of reshaping the way in which we understand and think about and prioritize the things that matter to us. But perhaps, and there are challenges about that with sustainability and environmental care, as well as care for one another. There's care for the planet. Again, just kind of going back to the Scotland's place in the world, and the prospect of us rejoining the EU. And I think there are those who would argue that way of thinking about the economy is actually becoming less compatible with the direction of travel within the EU and the single market. Do you think there would be any kind of conflict around that?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, the EU is not perfect. We didn't say it was. Majority of Scotland wanted to stay in it because of the benefits that it brings, and because of the cross-border working, and student exchanges and health standards and all the good things. But it's not perfect. But we would most certainly like, we most certainly did not want to come out of the EU, and we would like to get back in. So yeah, I mean, I think just very briefly diverting a wee bit, going back to the budget. When we talked about the budget, the one thing I forgot to say, and we didn't mention, was disastrous budget for the environment. Nothing brought forward in the way of investment in renewables, and the Tories, of course, want to forge ahead with oil and gas production, and just totally ignoring the plight that the planet is in. So yeah, that was just another point about the budget that we didn't mention. But yes, so no, definitely for the benefits of being in the EU.
Okay, well, there's huge challenges which lie ahead. But again, since we've been, a thread that's been running through our conversation has been women's lives, creating a more kind of equal, a fairer, a juster world for everybody. I wonder how you're feeling about that in the light of news this week about the Emma Caldwell murder trial and conviction, and the decision that the government has announced, the Scottish government has announced, that there'll be a public inquiry into the police investigation, the whole way in which that case was conducted. And alongside that, we've also been thinking again about Sarah Everard, and there was a powerful programme on TV during the week about that case, and again about the way in which there's a kind of culture of toxic masculinity, of misogyny that seems to be institutionalized in our police, but also in other other institutions and other structures of society. So I've got two questions really that come out of that. One is, how do we resolve that particular issue, the concern about the way in which institutions and the very systems and structures of society, we have this kind of embedded still misogyny, still inequality that's based on gender, on men and women being treated and regarded in different ways. But then more generally, how that impacts on women's lives, daily lives. Emma Caldwell, Sarah Everard, women who've been victims of femicide. The killing of women because they are women. We've been struggling to overcome and to really to deal appropriately with violence against women for a very long time. But these kind of events seem to indicate that we're not really making very much progress on that front. So where are we on violence against women, Rona?
Well, I mean, first of all, just when you mentioned Emma Caldwell, I'm delighted that the inquiry will take place. I think that the family, well, society are owed that, because clearly there was, dreadful misogyny and corruption within the police at that time. And we have to remember it was 18 years ago or something, but um, it was. We just couldn't let that pass, because the family have suffered such injustice, and it's been just terrible for them. And my heart goes out to them. I think Emma's mother's incredibly strong, and will continue to go ahead with this, to try and change the culture. And that's really what it's all about. It's about a culture change is needed. And misogyny is still rife in institutions, and when that happens, it's harder to change the culture if authorities are seen to be outwardly and openly misogynistic. In Parliament just now, I'm on the Criminal Justice Committee, and we are just in the first stages of a huge piece of legislation called the Victims' Witnesses and Reform Bill, and it's aiming to make just again have a culture change within our justice system, to make it a less horrendous journey for women, so that women are listened to. We've had countless survivors of rape and sexual abuse talk to us privately, some on the record, about their journey, and it frankly isn't good enough. And the current Lord Advocate, Dorothy Bain, has been true to her word and said that something radical was needed to change attitudes, and certainly to change the way women are treated by authorities and in the justice system. So we're in the middle of that just now. It's a huge bill, and hopefully that will make a difference. But yes, toxic masculinity is at play. I think we have to educate our young boys at an early age, and I know that there is good work happening. I know in my own local authority area, Eastern Bartonshire, the police are very proactive and have teams going into schools to talk about this. And I don't know. I think the idea of why there is more femicide and why violence against women does not seem to be decreasing is kind of a whole other argument. What are the drivers of that? And we probably don't have time to talk about that, but that's the fact. So we have to act. We have to act now and stop this terrible, terrible culture of violence against women.
Yeah, and I know that in Scotland, and I think also south of the border, there's been these proposals that we should have pilot schemes of non-jury rape trials, precisely because there's a concern about the wider social attitudes and the ways in which myths and stereotypes and so on play into that. So, I mean, there is that specific question, but to Frances, more generally, how do we tackle that culture, this kind of this embedded culture that facilitates and enables and does not sanction violence against women and men's entitled behaviour in relation to women?
I think that it's important, first and foremost, that women are believed. We've seen this also with other things like child abuse, where children are not believed. No, if people are not believed, we've seen it also with institutional racism, that the victims are not believed because of who they are. When you have that kind of entrenched institutional discrimination, it starts with these people are not credible. We don't believe what they say. And so even if they actually report something, which then leads to a much worse crime, so a woman maybe reports being stalked or something, right, is often not taken seriously because of who she is. And particularly, I have to say this, particularly if she's a sex worker, she's much less likely to be believed than if she's a good, homely, you know what I mean. Different type women who work in certain professions are less likely to be believed, less likely to be taken seriously, and frankly, more likely to be treated badly by the criminal justice system generally, simply because of what they do. That's not right.
Yeah.
Women who work in the sex industry are as deserving of the protection of the criminal justice system as anyone else. So it's these kind of attitudes with we don't believe you. We don't believe you because of who you are, not because of anything you've said. That's what needs to change.
Yeah, 100% to all of that. Totally agree. You mentioned, Lesley, the single judge rape trials. We are proposing a pilot, a limited time pilot of that to see the conviction rate for single rape complainers is only about 23%, which is just ridiculous, unacceptable. So we're proposing that, and we're also proposing the setup of a new sexual offences court, which will have trauma-informed practice embedded throughout. And that from the evidence that we've heard from survivors, rape myths are a thing. They absolutely are a thing. It's not always the jury's fault, but exactly as Frances was saying, because of maybe someone does the way they look, or maybe their history, but no woman ever deserves to be at the end of sexual violence. It's just it's a black and white thing. There's no way that can go on. So I think with a culture change, and as we're doing in Scotland legislation, and we have a new misogyny bill which will be coming onto the stocks shortly. With legislation, legislation doesn't help everything, but it does put down a marker that it's not acceptable to treat women in that way. And even in the courtroom, for defence lawyers, the way they speak to victims and witnesses, in many cases, not always, but in many cases, it's unacceptable. So if we have a law, part of the bill also is that trauma-informed practice will run throughout the bill. So basically, if you can stop a defence lawyer or whoever, emotionally abusing someone in the courtroom, you can say, you are breaking the law, you can't do that, and they must be held accountable, because no one's above the law, and the justice system aren't either. So yeah, so it's interesting times, and I think we've got the right attitude now. Well, it's a long haul.
It's a very long haul, and we've got centuries of these embedded attitudes, these kind of separating women into the respectable and the ones who are indecent in some ways, and it's all about controlling the narrative and who controls the narrative. But we're moving into the last minute of our conversation this morning, and this has also been the week of International Women's Day, and that's a day to mark and to celebrate the struggles and achievements of women down the years, begun by socialist women workers campaigning for proper working conditions and rights, and then more generally for equal rights and so on. So final word from both of you. Have you done anything to celebrate International Women's Day this year? And do you think it still matters that we have a day?
Yeah, just kept working. I mean, it's not just a day, is it? It's more than just a day. It has to be, every day, isn't it? There's so many women suffer injustices, and we have the word for me would be respect, and not to treat women badly, and to treat them as equals.
Yeah. Thanks, thanks, Rona. Frances?
I think that would be for me as well, that treating women with respect and remembering that caring is something that everybody does. It's not just women's job.
That's a good word on which to finish. Thanks, Frances, and thank you, Rona. That's us. That's it for this week's Full Scottish. And before I go, I just want to remind everyone that Broadcasting Scotland depends on the generosity of its supporters. The programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford any contribution, £5 a month, then do please consider becoming a supporter of Broadcasting Scotland. We've reached the emergency crowdfunder, and thanks to everyone who has signed up and who has donated. Thanks again very much to Rona Mackay and Francis Coppola for joining me this afternoon, and all the best and goodbye. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Lesley. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.